The Ottoman Empire lasted over 6 centuries, controlling vast territories across 3 continents at its peak. From the Balkans to North Africa, from Hungary to the Persian Gulf, Ottoman law stretched across an enormous and diverse population. Maintaining control over such a massive empire required more than just military might. It required a system of justice so brutal, so publicly terrifying, that rebellion seemed worse than submission. Welcome to Ottoman justice, where the punishment was designed not just to kill you, but to make absolutely certain everyone else learned from your mistake. They drive a sharpened wooden stake into your rectum. Slowly, carefully, they push it upward through your body. If they do it right, it misses your vital organs. The stake exits through your mouth or chest. You're still alive. You'll stay alive for hours, maybe days, displayed in the public square while crowds watch you die slowly. This was justice in the Ottoman Empire, and impalement was just one option. Ottoman punishments weren't designed primarily for the condemned. They were designed for everyone watching. Every execution, every mutilation, every public torture was a performance with a simple message. This is what happens when you break our rules. The more horrific the crime, the more spectacular the punishment. And the Ottomans had centuries to perfect their craft, developing a sophisticated array of methods that ranged from merely brutal to genuinely nightmarish. These weren't sadists inventing torture for pleasure. These were administrators implementing policy. The brutality was systematic, legal, often codified in official documents. A judge would sentence someone to a specific punishment based on specific crimes, following legal precedent. The executioners were professionals, trained in their craft, paid salaries by the state. This was justice, Ottoman style. It just happened to involve stakes, swords, hooks, and more creative applications of human suffering than most modern people can comfortably imagine. Let's start with something that sounds almost merciful compared to impalement, but was considered one of the worst fates imaginable: eye gouging. The Ottomans reserved this punishment primarily for traitors, for people who betrayed the state, for those whose crimes were political rather than merely criminal. The logic was brutally simple. You used your eyes to watch for opportunities to betray us, so now you'll never see anything again. Evliya Çelebi, the famous Ottoman traveler who documented his journeys across the empire in the 17th century, described witnessing eye gougings in public squares. The condemned would be brought out, restrained by multiple guards, because you don't want someone thrashing around during this procedure. The crowd would gather, just as they gathered for any public punishment, because these spectacles were entertainment, education, and warning all combined. The executioner would use a sharp instrument, sometimes a blade, sometimes a specialized tool designed specifically for this purpose. The goal was to remove the eyes completely, not just blind the person. This was permanent, total, irreversible, and unlike a quick beheading, the victim lived through it and continued living afterward, a walking reminder of what betrayal cost. Think about what this meant in practical terms. In Ottoman society, as in most pre-modern societies, losing your sight meant losing your ability to work most jobs, to navigate the world independently, to participate in normal social and economic life. You became dependent on others for everything. You were reduced from a person to a burden, from a participant in society to an object of pity or disgust. For many people, this was genuinely worse than death. Death ended your suffering. Blindness meant living with it for whatever years you had left, completely helpless, completely aware of what you'd lost. The symbolic aspect mattered too. Eyes represented perception, awareness, the ability to see opportunities and threats. Taking someone's eyes meant taking their ability to function as a thinking, planning individual. They could still hear about the world, but they couldn't see it, couldn't fully participate in it. They existed in darkness, literally and metaphorically, for the rest of their lives. And everyone who watched this happen learned a lesson. Betray the empire, and this is your future. Not death, something worse than death. Next is public beheading, which was a common method of execution in the Ottoman Empire for serious crimes. It was efficient, relatively quick, and created a dramatic public spectacle. A skilled executioner with a sharp sword could take a head off with one clean stroke. The victim would be forced to kneel, their neck extended, and then a flash of steel, A spray of blood, the head tumbling to the ground, the body collapsing. Over in seconds. But that efficiency doesn't capture the full picture. Beheadings were public events, carefully staged for maximum impact. They typically happened in central squares or marketplaces where large crowds could gather. The authorities wanted witnesses. They wanted people talking about what they saw. They wanted the story to spread through the community, then to neighboring communities, radiating outward until everyone in the region knew that someone had been executed and why. The condemned would be paraded through the streets before execution, giving people time to see them, to recognize them if they were local, to understand that this was a real person who had made real choices that led to this moment. This wasn't abstract justice happening somewhere else to someone else. This was happening here, now, to someone from this community, and you were watching it happen. Take the case of Sheikh Bedruddin in 1420. He was a former Ottoman judge, a respected religious scholar, a man with significant social status and education. He led a rebellion calling for social and economic reforms that attracted substantial support from peasants and other disaffected groups. This made him dangerous. The Ottoman authorities couldn't tolerate a charismatic religious leader convincing people that the system needed to change. That kind of thinking spreads. It undermines the entire power structure. When his rebellion was crushed and he was captured, there was never any question about his fate. His education didn't save him. His religious credentials didn't save him. His former position as a judge didn't save him. He was beheaded publicly in Serres, modern-day Serres in Greece, specifically so that everyone in the region would know that rebellion, no matter who you are, ends with your head separated from your body. After military victories, Ottoman forces would sometimes decapitate captured enemy leaders and soldiers. But they didn't just kill these men, they turned their heads into trophies. Heads would be displayed publicly at the battle site, mounted on stakes or piles of stones, visible to anyone passing by. Or they'd be sent back to Istanbul, preserved in salt or honey for the journey, delivered to the Sultan as proof of victory. Sometimes these heads would then be displayed in the capital, showing the population that their empire was strong, that their enemies were defeated, that resistance was futile. Imagine being a regular person in the Ottoman Empire and walking through a city square where enemy heads are mounted on spikes. You can see their faces, frozen in whatever expression they wore when they died. You can see the ragged edges, where the sword cut through flesh and bone. You walk past these heads on your way to the market, on your way to work, on your way home. They're just there. Part of the landscape, a constant reminder of what happens to enemies of the empire. However, not all punishments were meant to kill. Some were designed to inflict pain, teach a lesson, and send you back into society as a living example of what happens when you break the rules. The falaka was one of these punishments, and it was used extensively throughout the Ottoman Empire for lesser offenses. The method itself sounds almost simple. You lie on your back or sit with your legs extended. Your ankles are secured in a wooden device that holds your feet in place. Then, someone beats the soles of your feet with a rod or a stick, delivering a specific number of strikes determined by whatever offense you committed. Here's what makes the falaka effective. The soles of your feet are incredibly sensitive. They're packed with nerve endings because they need to send your brain constant feedback about the ground you're walking on, about balance, about pressure. Beating the soles of the feet triggers all those nerves simultaneously. The pain is intense, immediate, and builds with each strike. After a falaka punishment, you couldn't walk. Your feet would swell, turning purple and black with deep bruising. Every step would be agony for days, sometimes weeks. And here's the clever part. Once the swelling went down and the bruising faded, there were no visible scars. You looked fine, but you remembered. Everyone who was punished with the falaka remembered that pain for the rest of their lives. The Ottoman military used the falaka regularly to discipline soldiers. Breaking ranks, falling asleep on watch, insubordination, these infractions might earn you 20 or 30 strikes. You'd be carried back to your quarters, unable to walk, and you'd lie there for days while your feet slowly healed. Your fellow soldiers would see you suffering, and they'd learn the same lesson you learned. Follow orders or hurt. Slave owners used the falaka on their slaves. Teachers used it on students who failed to memorize their lessons. It was a all-purpose corporal punishment that worked across different contexts because it was effective without causing permanent disability. You could beat someone's feet until they couldn't walk, and in 2 weeks, they'd be fine physically. Psychologically, they'd carry that fear forever. The public nature of falaka punishments added another layer of humiliation. You'd be held down in a marketplace or a courtyard while people watched you get beaten. You'd be screaming, crying, begging for mercy while crowds observed your suffering. When it was over, you'd be unable to walk away with dignity. You'd have to be carried or dragged, completely helpless, while everyone saw exactly how broken you were. But while a broken victim served as a powerful living warning, the ultimate warning was, of course, death. Hanging was common across many empires and kingdoms, but the Ottomans had their own variations that made it particularly grim. Standard hanging involved a rope around the neck, a drop that might break the neck quickly and cause relatively fast death. Ottoman hanging sometimes employed different methods designed to make death slower, more visible, more of a spectacle. In some cases, they used hooks instead of ropes. A large hook would be driven through the victim's body, maybe through the ribs, maybe through the jaw, and they'd be hoisted up and left hanging. This didn't kill you quickly. You'd hang there, impaled on a hook, slowly bleeding out or suffocating, while crowds watched and went about their business beneath you. You might live for hours. You'd definitely be conscious for much of it, feeling every second of pain, unable to do anything but hang there and die slowly. Thieves, murderers, rebels, all might end up hanging in public spaces. The body would be left there after death, sometimes for days, rotting in the sun, being eaten by birds. This served as a deterrent far beyond the moment of execution. Every day you walked past that corpse, you were reminded of what crime led to. The smell alone ensured you wouldn't forget. The sight of a body decomposing on a gibbet, gradually being reduced to bones and rags, was a powerful motivation to stay on the right side of Ottoman law. But sometimes, life is worse than death when amputation is carried out on a thief. Amputation as punishment has a brutal logic to it. You stole with these hands, so now you don't have these hands. You rebelled with these feet, so now you don't have these feet. The punishment directly relates to the crime in a way that everyone can understand immediately. Ottoman authorities would typically amputate a thief's right hand for a first offense. This was done publicly, usually in a marketplace since that's where theft often occurred. The thief would be restrained, their hand placed on a block, and then a quick chop with a sharp blade. The hand would be gone. Blood would spray everywhere. The stump would be immediately cauterized with hot pitch or a heated iron to stop the bleeding and prevent infection, though infection killed many amputation victims anyway. Losing a hand destroyed your ability to work most jobs. Craftsmen needed 2 hands. Farmers needed 2 hands. Even simple labor typically required 2 hands. You became disabled, unable to earn a living through legitimate work, which, ironically, might push you toward crime again out of desperation. But that wasn't the point. The point was that everyone could see you were a thief. Your missing hand was a permanent, visible mark of your crime. You carried your shame with you everywhere, unable to hide it, unable to escape the social stigma. For rebellion or repeated offenses, authorities might take both hands, or they might take feet. Taking both hands meant you were completely dependent on others for everything: eating, dressing, cleaning yourself, everything that requires manual dexterity. You went from an independent person to someone who needed constant care, again, arguably worse than death for many people. The punishment served multiple purposes simultaneously. It disabled the criminal, preventing them from committing similar crimes again. It marked them permanently so everyone knew what they'd done. It created a living deterrent that people saw every day on the streets, and it reinforced the power of the state to permanently alter your body as punishment for breaking its laws. But a punishment even more psychologically devastating than amputation was emasculation. The removal of a man's genitals was one of the most psychologically devastating punishments in the Ottoman arsenal. This wasn't just about physical pain or disability. This was about destroying a man's fundamental identity in a deeply patriarchal society where masculinity was central to social status, family honor, and personal worth. The procedure was straightforward in its brutality: restraint, then cutting away the genitals with a sharp blade, then cauterization to prevent death from bleeding. The victim survived, but as what? In Ottoman culture, as in many historical cultures, a man without genitals wasn't fully a man anymore. He couldn't father children, couldn't continue his family line, couldn't fulfill the social role expected of men. He was transformed into something else, something between categories, something that existed but didn't fit anywhere in the normal social structure. This punishment was reserved for specific crimes, sexual offenses, particularly rape or adultery, in circumstances that brought shame to powerful families. Political enemies might be emasculated to prevent them from having heirs who could challenge the sultan later. The goal was eliminating the person as a social and political entity without killing them. Dead people can become martyrs. Emasculated men just became embarrassments. The psychological impact extended beyond the victim. His family suffered social consequences. His sons, if he had any before emasculation, might face discrimination. His wife might face pressure to divorce him since he could no longer fulfill marital duties. The punishment rippled outward, affecting everyone connected to the victim, which multiplied its deterrent effect. And now we return to the impalement punishment mentioned at the beginning of the video. Perhaps the single most terrifying punishment in the Ottoman arsenal. The method is simple in concept, but horrifying in execution. A sharpened wooden stake, carefully prepared, smooth enough to slide through flesh without catching, tapered but not too sharp because you don't want to hit vital organs immediately. The victim is positioned, usually naked, to increase humiliation and make the procedure easier. The stake is positioned at the rectum. Then comes the skill part. The executioners who performed impalements were specialists who had done this many times. They knew anatomy. They knew how to angle the stake so it would slide upward through the body cavity, passing between organs rather than through them. If done correctly, the stake would travel through the torso, missing the heart, missing the lungs, eventually exiting somewhere near the collarbone or through the back of the throat. Done incorrectly, it would pierce vital organs and the victim would die relatively quickly, which defeated the purpose. The purpose was prolonged, public suffering. Once impaled, the victim would be hoisted upright, the stake planted in the ground, and they'd be left there. They were still alive. The stake had avoided their vital organs. They could breathe, though it hurt. They could scream, though that hurt too. And they would remain conscious for hours, sometimes days, slowly dying from shock, dehydration, infection, or eventual organ failure. The crowd could watch the entire process, watch the impalement itself, watch the victim's face as the stake traveled through their body, watch them being hoisted upright, watch them scream and beg and eventually fall silent as shock and pain overwhelmed them. Watch them hang there, still technically alive, but utterly helpless, until death finally arrived. Impalement was reserved for the worst crimes, severe treason, leading major rebellions, particularly heinous murders or sexual crimes. The message was absolute. Commit crimes this serious, and your death will be so horrific that no one will ever forget it. Your name will become a warning. Your suffering will become a legend that parents tell children to scare them into obedience. Vlad III of Wallachia earned his nickname Vlad the Impaler for his extensive use of this punishment, though he was fighting against the Ottomans rather than serving them. But the Ottomans themselves used impalement regularly throughout their territories. It was an established part of their judicial system, not some occasional excess. Judges sentenced people to impalement. Executioners performed the procedure as their job. Citizens watched it happen and understood it was legal, approved, normal, within the context of Ottoman justice. And have you ever wondered why Ottoman punishments were so brutal? Because brutality served a purpose. The empire controlled enormous territories with diverse populations who spoke different languages, practiced different religions, followed different cultural traditions. Keeping all these people under control required more than just soldiers and tax collectors. It required psychological control through fear. Every public execution was a message written in blood and pain. The empire is all-powerful. Resistance is futile. Obedience is your only option. These weren't mindless acts of cruelty. They were calculated policies designed to maintain order across a vast, potentially fractious domain. When people in Bulgaria saw what happened to rebels, they thought twice about rebelling themselves. When people in Syria heard stories about Ottoman punishments, they understood that challenging the empire had consequences worse than death. The Ottoman Empire is remembered for many things: its art, its architecture, its military prowess, its administrative systems. But it should also be remembered for this, for the systematic brutality that helped maintain its power, for the suffering inflicted in the name of justice, for the lives destroyed by punishments designed as much to terrify the living as to punish the condemned. This was Ottoman justice. It was legal, it was organized, it was policy, and it was absolutely, undeniably horrific.